he said, make work which is active, make work which changes, make work which is unstable. And though that statement was a sort of massive influence on the beginning of my like bodies of work and thinking about what photography is, can photography experience, is photography living and moving?
Welcome to the show, Alexander.
Hi, thanks very much.
Hey, I'm so excited to have you today. I've been looking at your work, and one of the things that really stood out to me was you even said this. You were in this show together. It talked about edges, and you really pushed the edges on what an image can be, and I got really excited to talk to you today. So I'm really excited about the conversation. But before we begin, go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience and tell us a little bit about who you are.
Well, thanks very much for very kind words. So I'm Alexander Mourant. I'm an artist based primarily in photography, but my practice spreads out into sculpture, performance, and installation. I'm a lecturer in photography at Kingston School of Art in London. And I'm also a writer and curator and do all sorts of things.
So talk to me a little bit about, were you always into art, or was it, talk to me a little bit about who you were before you were an artist. Is it something you were always drawn to, or did you kind of find your way into it? Talk to me about that.
I always liked art at school. I mean, I'm sure all artists I'm sure most artists their best subject at school was art. Like, it was the one you look forward to. The one you look forward to for the whole week was art, for 2 hours of art or whatever you had. I had my mum. My mum used to be like a ceramicist, or she used to paint pots professionally. She didn't actually used to make the pot, but she used to decorate and paint the pots with different designs. So I guess she kind of got me interested in art. And then when I went to school, those interests developed. And then when I was like doing GCSEs or A-levels, so when you're like 17, 18, I used to do ceramics. And I was quite obsessed with ceramics. And then eventually I started to use photography in my workbooks at school. And then I kind of became more obsessed with photography than I was ceramics. And it kind of all just sort of led on from there, actually.
What was it about ceramics that you were enamored by?
I don't know. I guess I don't know if you've ever done ceramics before. You know, you get different types of clay.
Yeah.
Like,
I'm terrible.
Like different. You get clay that has different roughness. So like different percentage. I don't know what the percentage indicates. I think it's percent. I think it indicates how smoothed out the clay has been. But I liked that we had different types of clay to begin with, and then, rather than just making things free flow, I started to get into this technique of slab building. And slab building is when you roll out slabs of clay, and then you leave them dry until it's leather hard, and then you essentially cut the clay, and then you can build pots like you've got walls, so they're very rigid. So you can make very modernist, geometric objects with them. And I've always been a bit of a perfectionist. I like straight lines and angles, shadows and contrast. So I actually took the organic material of clay and then created an object that was like very modernist and very geometric and then almost industrial. So I was just sort of really into that to begin with.
I think that's interesting. Were you so you grew up in the countryside, would you say, and like in a farming family? Do you think maybe that hands-on materiality kind of came from that upbringing, or talk to me a little bit? I'm curious, because that's So
I'm from Jersey, and in case people don't know, Jersey is a island, the original Jersey, not the one in America. Jersey Island, which is just off France. It's in between England and France. It's a small island, 9 miles wide by 5 miles high. And yeah, I grew up, my dad's a farmer from a farming family. So I guess a lot of my childhood was spent in the fields, on the farm, building dens. I guess being very hands-on. I mean, it's a great childhood to be outside all the time. And I think that definitely influenced my early artistic sensibilities, and still to this day is something I've actually come full circle, and now I'm really, really interested in that past, and in agriculture and farming generally, and our relationship to the earth.
I'm kind of curious about your parents. Were they supportive of the art kind of interest, or was it something that they were like, maybe you should learn how to? I'm curious. I came from a very practical working class family, so they were like, how do you make money doing that? I was curious, were they supportive of you in this regard, or were they artistic themselves and were into art and had it around you? I'm kind of curious about that.
That's funny you mentioned that, because it was only like last year that my dad actually said, okay, I've stopped worrying about your choice.
Yes, my dad said the same thing. Same thing last year, which is funny. Yeah, go on. Yeah,
he did say, like, from a practical point of view, he was like, I chose to do photography at university for a BA, and then he never told me, but he did say last year, like, that was quite a worrying choice for you to make, and I wasn't know what was going to happen with that sort of choice and decision. But last year he did say, I'm a bit more relieved now. I feel like you've got this.
You've made your way. Yeah.
Which is nice.
Yeah, good for you. Yeah.
I do feel like a bit precarious at times, or most of the time. But things are heading in the right direction. It's not easy by any means. But no, we were really well supported. I mean, all my siblings were. We've all come from the same place, and we've all gone on to do very specific things, different interests. And there was never any pressure to do this or become this person or this thing, which I think is why we developed into who we are and what our followed our main interests.
That's awesome.
So yeah, very supportive.
So when did it click for you? I know there's a moment that artists and photographers, they go, this is it. And however I figure out how to do this, I'm going to do this. And it's when you go down this, like, especially when it comes to families, they go, I don't know if you should probably learn how to be like a lawyer or something, and you're like, no, I'm going to do this. What was that moment where you were like, this is it?
I think probably when I was 17 or 18 and had to decide what uni to apply to and what I was going to go to do. And I had entertained the idea of doing architecture because I felt the pressure of that being like more of a proper career or a sustainable route or whatever. So I did an internship at an architect. Exactly.
Yeah.
So
he's an architect.
Yeah.
Okay.
Rather than being a conceptual artist, he's an architect.
Yeah.
I did an internship for like 2 weeks at an architecture firm, and it was so boring. And I was like, I like the idea of designing buildings, but like all of the other stuff that goes into it, I didn't think it was for me. And I also don't think I would maybe smart enough to actually become an architect. Not that artists aren't smart. So I think like I knew instinctively I just loved photography because that was my innate strength. I could just make images. I just knew how to, like, if we did a class where we had to do photography in the class, like I just innately knew how to compose and frame and balance images and stuff like that. And then I guess there came a moment where I was brave enough to be like, let's do this. I actually want to do this at uni.
Do you think were you at all interested in the dark room? Was there a dark room moment for you? That, because I know you do film and you do some experimenting with photograms and other things, so I definitely see some darkroom experience in there. So Was the dark room kind of a moment for you too?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we had a tiny little cupboard at school that had a dark room in it that could literally only have like 3 students in it. So I started to print there. That's the first time I ever did film. I had an amazing photography teacher at school that like really supported me, and we've kept in touch actually.
That's awesome.
So then when I was like 17, 18, that's when I started to shoot a film, develop it, and try and print it. I mean, I had no control of my prints, so if anything came out, I was like, that was a success.
Success.
Yeah. And then, when I did my BA, I got much more into the darkroom, or I got specifically a lot more into film, like medium format and large format film. And then when I did my MA, I actually chose to do an MA, not because I wanted an MA, but because I wanted to be in the darkroom. And I wanted to have access to the darkroom. And I thought I might as well get a degree whilst I'm in the darkroom. So yeah, then I did spend a lot of time in the darkroom, like weekends after weekends, just 12 hours a day in the darkroom.
I just see a connection between like your early interest in ceramics and darkroom physicality, because that's the very physical part of photography, in my opinion, is when you start to make prints and developing out film and going through a process. And I think you were writing once about there was a show that it was a statement about the show, and you were talking about that photography is often looked at as the less laborious parts of the arts, but when you get into the dark room and you make enough of those mistakes and you mess up that expensive paper, you start to realize this isn't as anti-laborious. It's not as hard, of course, sculpture. I don't want any of my artists out there that are sculptors thinking I'm trying to make a false equivalence here, but it's definitely, there's something there, and there's decisions you make to be creative, and I see you doing that, and so I really have to applaud you on that. So talk to me a little bit about some of your inspirations. Who is there any particular artists that were just like, wow, that just kind of got you thinking in a different way? Or
at what stage of my
let's say the early stages, let's talk BA, and we're like, you were like, I saw this artist and it really shaped the way I started to photograph, or anything really. You can even go to today, people that you're looking at today. I'm always kind of curious if there is anybody out there. Sometimes there isn't. And I hear that it's just some person in general that kind of influences, or an idea, that kind of gets them there. So I'm just kind of curious about inspiration.
I've got that. Yeah. I think I'll go with, like, because I'm a prolific researcher, so I could just do that as my job. Like I have looked at a lot of artists' work from across art history, and they all of them pull to form kind of the practice I have today. I borrow or pick things from different artists, and I've done it kind of intuitively and sometimes without even knowing. On my BA, I went through lots of different phases, like wearing different faces or different skins, like, oh, try that out. Like, there was at one stage I was obsessed with Alex Soth, which I'm sure a lot of photographers go through that. A lot of photographers go through that stage of being obsessed with Alex Soth and that style of like lyrical documentary.
I hear that name a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then so I was really into that, and then a big shift happened, and I became much more conceptual and thinking about what the image was and photography as a medium. But at the same time, I've always had this like sort of interest in like the poetics, and I'm still wanting images to be kind of like, I don't want to use the word beautiful, but they have that about them. And I remember my third year, I did fall in love with Raymond Meeks. And so I've always been a big admirer of Meeks, and I've actually, one of my prized possessions is I've got one of his handmade books.
Oh wow!
So that they were influences in terms of like making photographs, but then I drew a lot more influence from like conceptual artists such as Hans Hacker, and also writers like Rebecca Solnit, who built or helped lead the direction of what I was making rather than the way I was making it, if that makes sense. So I had visual influence, but I also had contextual and conceptual influences. Hans Hacker, I don't know if you know his work. He was
No, I'm not familiar. I'm going to after this because right. But I definitely know Rebecca Solnit. So yeah, and I can see the connection. Yeah.
Hans Hacker is conceptual artist who makes sort of kinetic sculptures. Often they're very elemental. So he has a work of like a fabric and a fan blows air to lift the fabric. Or he made this iconic work called Grass Grows, where he got a mound of earth in the gallery and then seeded grass and then grew grass. So they're sort of organic, active works. And I came across a statement he made, which was about what artists should do. And he said, make work, I'm paraphrasing here. He said, make work which is active, make work which changes, make work which is unstable. And though that statement was a sort of massive influence on the beginning of my like bodies of work and thinking about what photography is, can photography experience, is photography living and moving?
That is a fascinating thought, and that's fascinating. Can photography experience? You stopped me there. Photography, it can be interpreted in so many ways, and I love how you're pushing the edges on it, which I really appreciate, and I appreciate the context because that statement kind of connects a lot of dots from the series that we're gonna see a little bit later. My next question is kind of related to after you've gotten done with school, you spent time kind of developing your practice. Where did you end up after that?
Mm-hmm. So I did my BA at Falmouth down in Cornwall, and then I did my MA at the Royal College of Art in London. And then I actually graduated in 2020, just after COVID. And so it was quite a difficult time actually. And I actually spent a year at home, just working in my grand's clothes shop. So I was just doing a normal job, sort of getting the pieces back together again really, and trying to work out how I'd come back to London and start, to develop my work. But that time at home was really fruitful, and I made quite a few bodies of work at home. And then in the end of 21, I came back to London and took on a few commissions, and then started doing much more education-based work, doing a lot of sort of workshops and working with different arts organizations. And then eventually in August, I got a more permanent contract as a lecturer at Kingston. And so I've been sort of managing my own personal projects alongside developing my interest in education and pedagogy.
You have such a great track there, and one of the spin-offs that I was kind of curious was the collective that you're a part of.
Yes.
Can you talk to me a little bit about that, and then also like talk about what it feels like, what it's like to be in a collective?
Sure, definitely. Yes. So when I was at the RCA, someone the year above me, Victoria Doyle, she created a reading group, and it was just like a group of us that liked books, and we came together and we shared like our favorite readings or references on photography. And then through that process, I met some of the founders of Revolve Collective, which is an artist collective founded in 2017, I believe. And it was founded by Lena and Krasimira after they left Portsmouth University. It was created because they felt a loss of community. So when you're at art school, you have a group of people to crit with and to like look at work. But then when you leave that education system, you're sort of lost, and a lot of artists lose that network. So Revolve was formed to be like a group to gain feedback, but also a group to sort of make your own opportunities happen. And And so it sort of developed. And by the time I was invited to join, they'd already done like a few exhibitions and open calls and zines. And I jumped to the chance to join. I thought it could really expand and develop my practice. I always say I was a kind of a square before. Like if I was a shape, I was a square. I was very like straight edged and I knew what I wanted to do. And I was very like a determined, independent artist. But then since being Revolve, I've kind of rounded my edges, and then I've become a circle that engulfs the square. So I've like developed loads of skills and experiences in terms of like working with people and collaborating with people. And also it's really helped the way from my education practice. And just the idea of skill swap, you know, I've got strengths in some areas. But then I also have no idea how to do this other thing, but someone else in the collective might be their strength. So it's been a really interesting time. I mean, a collective is very tricky if you've ever been in one. You've got lots of ideas, trying to work out when you should take the lead or when you should take a back seat, when you should support, when you should be more vocal. So it can be tricky, especially if you're a whole different group of people. And also like everything we do is mainly unpaid. So it's often like really late phone calls on like at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock at night on a Sunday or something to get a project off the ground. So it's a labor of love. But we have all learned a lot from the process. Is there anything you want to know in particular about it?
I can imagine. Well, I think the main thing is I think the collective is kind of where art is kind of evolving to. I have this theory, and maybe you can kind of correct me on this, but you talked about Skillshare and skill swapping, you know, and I just have this like idea that's been percolating in me that the idea of a solo genius artist is kind of dead or dying. It's on its deathbed. And that the next great works of art are going to be from collectives. I thoroughly believe it. And it's going to be from groups like you, like you're a part of. And the reason is because even if there is a solo name up on that wall, there's so many hands that were involved in bringing that up there. And so like I just think a collective is kind of where it's evolving to. And I'm just curious, like what that experience is like. So much of us are encouraged to kind of be solo artists, the solo genius, and there's that percentage of people that actually make it is very small, you know. But I think if a group pulls together, maximizes their strengths, and tackles the big ideas of the world, that they can continue to do the thing that they love. And I think that's where the next big idea that makes big groundbreaking works are going to be coming from. And so I repeated myself there in a circle, but I was just curious what your thought is on that, now being a part of a collective, and if you've thought about that at all, or just curious.
Yeah, I definitely think I totally agree with you with sort of demystifying the legend of the lone artist. That is some sort of creative genius that exists only in their own mind, or in their in their studio, making just masterpiece after masterpiece.
Ordained by God, you know, just
ordained by God. And then really, you know, that phrase. No person is an island. Especially in art, all art is so interconnected. It's all a web of influence, impressions, and expressions that everyone adds to. And so to even pretend to be above that or outside of that, I think is very difficult to accept. But so yeah, I think being the collective does combat that. It's humbling. I think it's really humbling. I think artists are at risk of maybe going with their own egos too much. I think artists needs to have ego. They need to stand up for what they believe in. But yeah, I guess it's the sensitivity towards others. And also, if we think about the world generally, there's a real need to reflect. And I mean, people will probably roll their eyes when I say this, but like come back together again.
Yeah.
And build up, and where it should be a level playing field. So yeah, it's really interesting in terms of thinking in terms of like horizontal working rather than vertical working. So like everyone builds at the same time rather than there's someone being at the top.
I just think it's fascinating. And when I saw that you were a part of that collect, and then I saw the work that was produced, it was unified but separate. It was almost like if I were to say it, I was looking at a CD or something, like, or some kind of an album, and everyone was playing to the same tune, but they had their own song, and it came together to make this awesome album. You know, that's the best way I could put it. But it was really thoughtful, and I loved it. And I loved the questioning what a photograph can be, and the way it's being represented. And it was just it was refreshing, and I enjoyed looking at that. And so I definitely had questions. I could spend this whole show kind of diving into the idea of the collective, but thank you for sharing your experience with it. I guess my next thing is I kind of want to get into your head a little bit and think, kind of dive into the inspiration that makes you work. What ideas and things inspire you to create? I know you have one body of work that I'm really interested in because I'm doing a little bit of that kind of self-reflecting on my own roots and where I come from. And so what inspires you to make things? What are those big ideas that you go after? What are those big ideas that get you to pull the shutter button on that camera? What pulls your eye, you know?
I'm very premeditated, so instinct firstly, but because I've been working for a certain amount of years now, I have like key interests or themes that are constantly being developed, and I'm constantly trying to pick at them or understand them better. I'm not someone that will just be like, oh, this brand new thing. It comes from years of slow burn, research, thinking, reflection, to then actually become a work. And because I'm a very conceptual artist, and I don't have much time, and I want to be efficient with my resources in terms of like I can't afford to make everything. I usually will think about a work for like 2 to 3 years, and I will build it in my head, and it will live in my head. Like I've got loads of artworks in my head right now. I turn it over again and again, and then once it goes through like loads of clearance stages, I then go, yes, let's make it, and I do it in like a week.
Time to go. Yeah. I was probably the same way. I'm the same way. It stressed my when I was in school. It stressed my teachers out. They're like, "So when are you going to make something?" I'm like, "I'm not done yet." Really? So you're kind of percolating ideas. That's fascinating. So what themes do you find yourself attracted to?
So I'm interested in farming, agriculture, land-based practices that comes from my interest in land art, the 1960s to 70s movement where artists worked in the landscape. And I'm interested in like understanding what the photograph is, and new like speculative ways of thinking about what photography is or can be. I'm interested in unlearning what we think we know, and challenging established hierarchies. And I'm also interested in understanding the photograph with the body, not just with the eyes. And so all of my work sort of brings in like bodily based experiences to photography and seeks to further photography through all of these different processes. And also generally I'm interested in like sculpture and performance and those sorts of things. Interdisciplinarity is what I'm interested in.
And so you're looking at landscape, but that idea of the body, and it reminds me of something you said earlier. Can photography experience? Are these two related? Is this kind of... Yeah. And what do you mean by that?
So, like, I did when I was 20 or 21, I did a project in Africa where I was photographing for a charity. And then when I came back and I developed through my film, I was really frustrated at the photographs because they weren't embodying the sense of the time and the place where I was and the experience and what I got from it. They weren't, that somehow that wasn't translated or imbued in the photograph. It wasn't entombed in it. And so I felt an inherent failure of photography. And so it kind of pushed me down this path of thinking about how can photography experience, like, can it continue? How is emotion and memory and bodily based things contained within it? And I also started to think about, like, I have this thing with photography, like, as soon as I see a photograph, I feel like I can literally step into it and walk around it. I feel like my sensory understanding of what's in an image is so vivid that it becomes three-dimensional. And so it's a base about a lot of all of that. Sorry, it's very abstract thinking.
No. You're doing a great job explaining that. I love that visual of you have like almost a sensory memory of it. Like you could step in and you have this. I couldn't agree more. I think the limitations of a photograph is that it is 2D, and you lack this other level that it's kind of hinting towards, but yet seems to be separated from, and it's one of the main limitations. So is this why you kind of think outside of that and you kind of move into sculpture and other things, is you're trying to bridge that gap that you're experiencing?
Yeah, I mean, it's just questioning. It started the journey of what photography is and how things relate to photography, and how we can understand what the photograph is. It's also rooted in my interest in, like, somehow trying to activate the image more. So, like, a lot of my early work uses, like, humidity to fog film or to fog the camera lens. That gives it kind of like this palpable nature. It feels like dense, like you can move through it. So it's all part of, like, making work that engages the body in some way in this sort of sensory engagement with the image. Yeah. Again, I've gone on a tangent. I actually forgot what your question was.
You have it. No, you're actually, you're in my line here. We've got it. No, it's, I think you're doing a great job, because, like, one of the things that we're about to see, and I think this is a great setup for us to dive into one of our first works, and that's Aomori. Mm-hmm. And this series was interesting because you were, I think there are blue filters out there, you know what I mean, that exist, and you can actually edit and post to get blues, but you actually got a piece of glass, blue glass, and you were kind of using that as kind of a self-made kind of filter on the world that you were actually then photographing through. And I think the interpretation into the final image was really fascinating. So talk to me a little bit about that project, and talk to me a little bit about what you were thinking there.
Sure. Would you like me to show you some pictures?
We can, yeah. Let's go ahead and jump. Yeah, we can jump in.
This is one of the first images from the series Aomori that I made in Japan in 2017. This is a work called Blue Tree. And yeah, as you were saying, so Aomori is distinct from my bodies of work because it is all monochrome in blue. The work was inspired by actually a picture I made from an earlier series called Blue Parrot, which is where I took this photograph of a parrot in a butterfly house, and it's an image that, like, did really well for me when I graduated. It got published in quite a few places, and I started to think about why so many people were so attracted to that image, the blue parrot. It's very graphic, it's very visceral, and so it led me to develop my research and thinking on the nature of blue in art history, and to develop a project that specifically would look at that color, as well as bringing together lots of other things. So I saved up some money and then went to Japan And then I started actually photographing everything. Like I was photographing cityscapes and portraits, places and still lives, all through this glass filter. So before I went, a church in Jersey was being renovated, and they'd taken some of the old glass down to replace. And I managed to get given a piece of the blue glass, and I had it cut to fit my Mamiya 7. And so all the images that I was making in Japan was with a medium format, with Mamiya, shooting through this blue church glass to create these images. If you've ever used film, you'd know the film is normally orange, but with these negatives, they're like bright orange because when you print them, they're blue. So that's sort of how I started to make the work. And in Japan, I was sort of moving around different spaces, and I really became interested in forests. I actually went to an island called Yakushima, which is where a lot of Studio Ghibli graphic like novels are designed. There's like this famous forest path that appears in a lot of Studio Ghibli's sort of forest scenes. So I started doing lots of hiking around these areas and making images in the forest, and really slowing down and starting to question what the forest was. And so in the end, when I left Japan and came back to London, processed through all my film, I started to make a really tight edit of just the forest images. And that eventually became Aomori, which means blue forest in Japanese. And it became the sort of heart of the work. This idea about the nature of blue, but also the philosophy of the forest as a place of sort of ancestral time and metaphysics.
It's really, I love blue, and you were, if I'm not mistaken, you were reading Rebecca Solnit's "Is It the Blue of Distance?"
Yes, yeah, in a field guide to getting lost.
Yeah, and she beautiful writing. I recommend reading this. And this idea of blue being kind of a symbol for distance. Did you feel similar? Did it relate to you? Talk to me a little bit about that. I'm kind of curious because you did some research in this idea of blue.
Yeah, so I looked at I first of all actually looked at the artist Yves Klein, who I'm sure you're familiar with, who famously made he painted International Klein blue, his own pigment, which is this like beautiful visceral blue. And I researched a lot about his thinking on the color, but also his use of installation and the way he like changed the gallery space to engage with these sort of rectangles of blue. And then after Yves Klein, I also was reading like Rebecca Solnit, and her famous. She's really quoted quite a lot actually. When I read it, I don't think she was quoted as much. But yeah, she speaks about in this chapter that reoccurs in the book, The Blue Distance, about the atmospheric conditions that happen in order to make a landscape from far away appear veiled in like a blue shawl. And that's because of the wavelengths of light. But the thing with the bluer distance, if you stood on a hill and then you looked across the landscape, you would see in the distance that it looks kind of blue tinted. That is the blue of distance in effect. And the thing about the blue of distance is that you can never be in it. You can only see it from afar. So innately it represents desires, places we cannot quite reach. You can see it but not touch, cannot grasp it. So it represents this idea of desiring. And I thought I wanted to bring the blue of distance near into the world of the image, because maybe the blue of distance and this kind of inability to reach was contained by the nature of photography or the image itself. So yeah, I kind of wanted to bring that in or steal it. Also,
it's wonderful. Yeah. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was going to add one other thing. So, Hokusai, the Japanese woodblock printer. You'll know him from the famous image, the famous print of, the Great Wave, with Mount Fuji in the background.
Yeah. That's the first thing I thought of, and I was just
Yeah. So he did a whole series of views of Mount Fuji, and in my research, I think I came across that at the time, Japan had its borders closed to the outside world, but Hokusai had smuggled in Prussian blue pigment to make these woodblock prints. So the primary pigment in those works is blue, and a lot of that is to represent the experience of dawn in the landscape. So, before the sun rises, the landscape is normally hidden or veiled in blue. And so Hokusai was using blue throughout those landscapes to represent that time of day, but also to express the Japanese interest in the landscape being kind of immortal, this kind of sentient being. And it sort of links into lots of ideas of different spirituality and Shintoism in Japan, their respect for the landscape as this kind of being. So blue is related to that as well.
You start getting into these ideas of one of my favorite conversations to have is this idea of deep time and the environment, and how it's we are just a blip on its existence, and what it has experienced. It's so interesting that you're kind of these are all just little layers of what you're thinking about that actually inspire this work, which is fascinating. I had read in an interview that you were quite an admirer of Japan, and your research is quite fruitful there, and you find yourself quite you're researching a lot about Japan. What is it that attracts you to learning more, and it inspired you to go out there? So, talk to me a little bit about that.
I actually can't. I think it was when I was coming to graduate uni, and I'd saved up some money working in the summers, and I won the Free Range Award when I graduated, and the prize came with a solo show and some money, and so I decided to put the money towards a trip to Japan. And to further my thinking of photography, as I said, I'd made this previous body of work and I wanted to create something. And it just could have aligned with my interest that I would be going to Japan to make this for the show. And I'd also was having a chat with one of my best mates, and so we decided to go together as a sort of trip. He stayed for a month, and then I was there for 2 months. And the first month was sort of just me doing more tourist stuff. But then the second month I was going to so many galleries, going to so many sites, gardens. And just really get into that culture, or the landscape in particular. I think, I have those core references with Hokusai, and also I'm very interested in Japanese contemporary artists like Daisuke Yokota, who push the medium of photography, and they question the ontology of photography by destroying the film, or manipulating the film in a way which makes us think about the photograph as something tactile. And a lot of my work is based in this kind of bodily sensory experience. So I think for me it all kind of combines.
So it was just a natural progression of what you were thinking about, and kind of questioning about the medium itself. And
yeah,
I think it's fascinating. You also have some great installation. I think we would be missing out not to see how you think about images in space. And when you're photographing, are you already thinking like that, or are you just kind of making images and then that comes later? Talk to me a little bit about that.
So with Aomori in particular, I told you about Yves Klein.
Yeah.
So the blue
I
artist.
started to, when I saw this, I was like, okay.
So I researched a lot of his early shows, and he had a show in the late 50s at Gallery Iris Clert in Paris. And for this show, he did something that no one else had ever done, which was he plastered the gallery walls with white paint and then did a very minimal hang, with just a few varying sizes blue canvases. And he did that to like change our bodily understanding of the gallery to increase or heighten our concentration on the artwork, and in particular the color. And so I knew with Aomori I wanted to emulate that within the gallery space, to have these varying sized rectangles to engage with the work. For Aomori, I knew the show I'd be having it in, and I went with my flatmate and I actually brought some masking tape and I taped out the size of all of the walls and the size of the works I wanted on each wall. So the sizes you see were actually custom made for the gallery in a way that felt balanced for me. And then the works were printed that size. And they, most of them are quite large, they're quite engulfing. But there are some that are quite small and much more delicate and require you to go up close and to have a bit more of an intimate encounter with the work.
It's wonderful. So when you were photographing these, and I guess that goes back to my original, were you already thinking this?
Yes.
You were like, this is exactly what I want to do. So the way you're filling the frame, because some of these are blue all the way through, and then you have some kind of nice gradients and some nice softer blues and stuff like that. So it kind of looks like you were already thinking that way. And I think that's already fascinating to me. So talk to me about that. Are you...
Yeah. Well, it comes from some earlier work where I used humidity a lot. And I like this appearance or disappearance of things in the image. I like things emerging in the image and then disappearing into it, whether that's the color itself or forms or the subject matter of the work. There's a work in particular, a large landscape work called Dissipate One, which when you see printed, it actually looks really beautiful, large, printed. This is one of the most abstracted images where you can only vaguely work out what is actually happening in the scene. I was like photographing a very, very humid walk where the camera was completely fogged and the sun was rising above a tree on the forest walk, and it completely mixed with the humidity and the blue filter to create this incredible gradient. It was just very painterly, which again references this idea of painting from Yves Klein. So I am, to answer your question, I'm very interested in like things being obscured in the image and having to spend more time with it. And it's also brings us back to this idea of seeing and how we see, and like the fallibility of the eyes to maybe not quite see things perfectly. My eyes, I have glasses, I have quite strong glasses. If I take my glasses off, I can barely see anything. And so there's this idea of the images also replicating that sense of my body for me.
There's the connection. That's awesome. And you know what's interesting is you're kind of leaning into again the struggles of being a photography. It's like you're leaning into, because I can tell you right now, when I have a foggy lens and I'm trying to get my shot, I have to wait for that to kind of pass so I can get the actual shot. But you're using it, and it's almost like in what I really appreciate from you is that you're kind of leaning into the limitations of photography, and actually creating your own rules. And I really enjoy that. You're kind of creating your own dialogue, you're creating your own vision, and using this as a medium, and not necessarily trying to do you see where I'm going with this? I think so many people get kind of stuck in the idea of digital versus film and this and that, and there's an ideal of what an image is or whatever, but you're creating your own rules and crafting your own way, and I really, really appreciate that.
Thank you. I think
do you feel like that's what you're trying to do?
I think I've got like innate curiosity and I like breaking rules. So
where does that come from?
I hate being told what to do.
Where does that come from?
It's because I'm the young. It's because I'm the youngest sibling, so I hate being told what to do. No, I think it's an interest and a love for the medium, and it's also like about expressing the potential of the medium, which I think is often so restricted by, I hate to say it, the majority of the people that use photography.
I would agree with that.
So yeah, it's also just being a bit curious, being like, what if I do this, or what if it turns out like that? And I guess it's also trying to get at this innate thing I need to feel in my body with the image for me to like fully connect to it. And so it's about pushing or working with photography as a collaboration for us to achieve whatever the work is. It's also about experimenting it. Sorry.
There's this level of experimenting, but you have this almost intuitive nature to where you actually like, you understand what limitations you're playing in, and then that's your rule for it. So you have a clear aesthetic that goes through. It's not just one image that turns out this way. You're creating that and sticking with it, and like creating your own world for a little bit. And then I just love that. And isn't that art? Isn't that what we do? So that's amazing. You also kind of do that with the next series that we're going to look at too. And you're kind of using these same kinds of aesthetical choices, and I hate that word aesthetic, but visual choices and so on. We can also take a look at that as well too, if you'd like, unless you want to add more about this.
No,
I feel like it needs to be said.
I'll just find the images.
Okay.
This work is quite different to Aomori. It's in black and white, firstly. It's a body of work called I Could Not Tell Glass from Air, which is a line from a Lavinia Greenlaw poem called The Empty Metaphor. And so all of my work kind of has this trail where it leads into the other, and it might not be obvious to a viewer, but for me, that's how I guide myself through my work. So I've always been very interested in glass as a material. I've been researching like glass and its relationship to images, and maybe how they are one and the same. But also my interest in like the glass being used in Aomori, the church glass that was used to create the color. And then more broadly, I have an interest in greenhouses. The first body of work I made called Aurelian was based in butterfly houses. And then for this work, I returned to the greenhouse, but to greenhouses in Jersey. And so in Jersey, when I was growing up, I used to cycle past all these amazing ruined greenhouses. And they're the sort of relic from a booming agricultural era in Jersey during the 50s and 60s, where a lot of like cut flowers were grown, and tomatoes and fruit and veg inside these greenhouses on quite a mass scale in the Channel Islands. But unfortunately, due to like the 1981 oil crisis, I believe the entire industry collapsed because farmers couldn't afford to heat their greenhouses, and there was various other political reasons. But essentially, the industry collapsed, and so what you're left with in Jersey is a graveyard of greenhouses. And over time, the structures have bent and broke. They've collapsed in on themselves. Ivy has reclaimed it. Nature has done its thing and is slowly engulfing the architecture of the greenhouses. And for me, innately, like, I'm so emotionally connected to those sites that I just started to visit and photograph. Very simply, I just started to navigate around these sites and start to make pictures to try and understand what it is about that environment that I found so interesting. So yeah, that was the kind of beginnings of I Could Not Tell Glass from Air. And I spent 2 years just visiting and photographing.
It's very shallow depth of field you're playing with, like your focus a lot. And why were you? I'm kind of curious what you were nailing it on that other series, but now you're here kind of getting narrow. Is there any deep idea behind that, or is it just an aesthetic choice? Or I'm kind of curious.
No,
I love it. It's gorgeous.
I really wanted it to be so delicate, and it's about seeing closely. But it's also about
that's what I was
seeing. It's also about like seeing as a camera and embodying the camera. So I realized only after I started like scanning the negatives or printing the negatives that I was trying to like embody or become the camera. And so everything is very focus intensive, very shallow depth of field.
Really close up. Like really close up.
Yeah. And I think it's
in these first few at least.
Yeah, look, I think most of the images are quite close up. I guess a sense of like you don't ever really see the whole structure, and you're just with me looking at pieces of the structure that have broken or that represent the kind of overall feeling of what's happened there, which is this kind of desolation.
So much of this comes from intuition and feeling. So how does that make you feel? Seeing kind of this ruin of an idea, of an era.
Quite sad. I mean, so my granddad used to grow tomatoes in greenhouses similar to these. So there's kind of like autobiographical connection to like this loss of industry that my family is still like a part of in terms of farming, but not in this way. So there's that kind of personal connection I've always had to these sites, but also I'm just very interested in like forgotten or abandoned or overlooked places. They're a kind of sanctuary and they're beautiful, but also very sculptural. And so looking at the greenhouse, visiting, taking photographs of sections of it, of where it might have broken or where a plant might be encroaching on it, kind of helped me to think about the nature of sculpture as well. And like, and what is happening to this site, and also the nature of entropy. So like, the nature of anything for energy to transfer and to change and to devolve. And weirdly, like these greenhouses are collapsing, but in their collapse, they're also growing or changing. But it's like a positive collapse. And so I am around.
It is a fascinating thing to see, like nature reclaiming itself, and I call it a reclaiming. Some people can call it whatever they wish, but it's just an interesting thing to witness, because it's almost in slow motion. It's that idea of deep time again. Yeah,
definitely,
and
very deep time.
Yeah. And what's interesting is I still see that being okay with was there like a fogging happening you were playing with again, or in the lens, or was it because I love the great, like this one here. Yes, I love the gradient in this, and I love the subtle details, and it's almost it's like a gentleness to it, and there's a care that's there. I really enjoy this one for sure, and I love black and white done well, and this is done well because you're going from like a high contrast to kind of low contrast, and it's interesting for sure. And seeing that conceptual element of yourself in there, and the abstractness of it, and you don't really see like the protagonist here. You don't see but you can almost feel it. Is that what you're going for?
Definitely. And I started to continue, like what you had in Aomori, and my earliest body of work is this sort of fogging. And so to do this fogging, I actually would unroll the film in the darkroom before developing it, and I used to just like light a lighter, and I would just uncontrollably just allow the film to fog wherever it wanted to, and then so I'd essentially risk destroying certain images. And so this is
breaking the rules again.
Yeah. Well, it's forcing the image.
Wow.
It's like kind of forcing the image to experience more. Maybe I don't know. I don't know. I mean, photography does.
Yeah.
But that was very early days, and I was like, there's something about I had to keep doing it, and I destroyed so many good images by doing that. But this is
so funny.
That was very, I thought, successful.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
You almost don't even a light leak usually is so obvious, but in this one, you can't really get it. It's like the subject actually is the hero here, and so like I think that's really interesting. Now that I know how you did it, I cringe a little bit, but at the exact same time, I enjoy the playfulness of it. It's not play. I don't like that word playful. I've used that many times, but there's a rule-breaking nature to it. Like you don't care what the rules are. You're just kind of trying to capture something. And it's interesting. There's two things that I talk about this a lot in the show. I've referenced it a couple times, and maybe you can talk about this because it seems like you do this a little bit more than I've seen some people do it. But there's two edits that happen. That first one is, framing out an image and clicking the shutter button in order to create an image. And then afterwards, when you actually have those images all laid out and you then make an edit then. So there's two edits that happen. One kind of is when you actually take it, and one is when you select them to embody what it is that you're trying to say through a body of work. And that creative process in between is something that I really enjoy seeing in your work. And so talk to me a little bit about that second edit for you. Are you constantly laying out images and going, not quite there yet. Talk to me a little bit about that creative process for you.
I haven't let me formulate what I was going to say.
It was a deep question.
As I said with Aomori, I came back to London with 100 rolls of medium format film. So is that 1,000 images?
Are you shooting?
You get
12?
10 images on a medium format roll.
Oh, you're getting 10.
10 times 100.
Yeah.
Is that 1,000?
Anyway, it is 1,000.
I had a lot of negatives, and that was literally I scanned any image that I was interested in, and as I say, it was only until I started to see the nature images, and at the time I happened to be reading John Berger, some of his writing on forests and woods, and some other philosophy that maybe focus on that subject matter in particular, and then the edit naturally became that focus on the natural environment. There are some really beautiful images and strong images from different scenes, but I gravitated towards the forest because of maybe what I was being influenced by at the time of the edit, so the reading I was doing. I think there's a whole big process for me in terms of the research and reading I do before I start making the work for the initial idea. Then I start making the work and keep reading and researching. And that can become tricky because it means your ideas develop and what you want for the work changes. And so then when you come to the edit, you're different from when you started. So then what you want from the work has changed. So I think I'm so on that if I'm not careful, I could end up just never ever really having an edit because what I want changes. But to answer your question for this work,
we always are changing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we're always changing, and I think any good project will change you, just because of the discoveries and the realizations and the reflections that are had throughout the process. And so someone wrote one time that the process is the work, Totally. And so I think that's interesting. I kind of see that here, and I'm seeing a through line through all of this, and I was just curious about that process for you. Take us through some more and kind of talk us through it a little bit.
The process of shooting these.
Just take us through like more images and kind of talk through it a little bit more as you wish, and you can add any more that we might have been missing.
Well, so I started first, like I was shooting for about 2 years, and then the work sort of pushed itself even further, where I started to actually want to work with the materials that I'd harvested from the greenhouses. So it kind of led me into actually working with photograms, so cameraless photographs. And so the simple ones I started doing was collecting bits of glass that was on the floor of the greenhouses and then taking them back to the darkroom. And so this one here you can see is actually a photogram of glass from the greenhouses made on a large format negative. And so I actually just placed glass onto an unexposed large format negative, and then again using a lighter, I exposed the negative from the lighter. So that's why you can see light fogging from the top, but also how all of the glass is actually glistening in the image. And so that's the light has gone through and activated all of those tiny shards to imprint on the negative. And so for me, the process started with photography to explore and examine and investigate the site. And then there came a point where I kind of left traditional photography and started to work with the materials from the site and this sort of like indexing of materials from the site.
So that's a negative and not photo paper.
No, so
because I've seen this done on photo paper. So you did this on a negative.
The glass is on a negative, but then I scanned and then printed the negative, or I just printed it directly in the darkroom. So the photogram is on the negative itself.
That is fascinating. That's fascinating because that's not typically how this is done.
No.
And so you kind of created your own way. How did you just flick the light? The exposure times are so fast. So like that's crazy. That's amazing. Wow. Okay. I thought I had that figured out, but I didn't. Wow.
Yeah, it's the same.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love how it made its way. The way you frame it. Wow. Okay. It's gorgeous.
So that's a print. That's a silver gelatin print that I made from the negative. But the negative itself is a photogram.
Okay. Yeah. Is it still a photogram if it's on film? I guess it would be, right?
I'm not sure who the photogram police are.
They're not watching this show. Maybe they are. I don't know. Could you imagine?
I think a photogram. I'd say it's a cameraless photograph. So you can make a photogram on like photographic paper, but you can also make a photogram on a photographic negative.
We can ask Man Ray, huh?
Yeah, let's ring up Man Ray.
He would be the guy. Yeah, he's the police. Sorry. But that's fascinating. Okay. Yeah. And so the materiality, now you're kind of breaking away from photography itself. You were using photography as the medium kind of more traditionally. And now you're getting into kind of experimenting with materials, and you're starting to break the rules again, and you're kind of bouncing out of it. And why did you feel the need to do that?
If I didn't feel a need,
what inspired you to do that?
I think it's because I've been wanting to make things in a different way, away from just the camera. I don't really make photographs anymore. And I think this was the start of that, of experimenting with photograms, and also just understanding the material, the glass from the greenhouse. And also like, again, thinking about photography's relationship to glass. And yeah, so it just became a natural investigation in that direction.
It's amazing. It's what we're going to see a little bit later. You actually kind of show us a little bit of that, and that kind of breakaway from, starting to get into material things. And I think it's a wonderful break in. You're about to show us an installation, kind of how you did this in a grid.
Oh yeah, so the early investigations then led to me actually taking panels of glass from the greenhouse in sections, transporting them to the darkroom, and then photogram printing them onto silver gelatin paper. And so in this image, you have a grid. In this work, it's called a gesture of brambles. You have 18 glass panels that were taken from the greenhouse of one area. And so what you can see, if you can look in the middle, there's a sort of gentle brush stroke going across. And that has been made over time on the panels. And so where you have the lighter, whiter texture on those images, that's moss or lichen that has grown on the greenhouse panels. So over time, moss and dirt has built up on the panels, organic material has. And then the brushstroke you can see is where a large piece of bramble had grown over the greenhouse, and then in the wind, it gently was swiped against the panels, sort of grazing it and eroding the moss. And so the brambles, the thorns of the brambles were etching away at the glass and the moss to keep it clean. So that's why you can see a trace of where it was brushing. And I see that as a form of drawing. And so for this work, I loved it. I thought it was like the greenhouse drawing itself or drawing upon itself. And so I dismantled each panel and then photogram printed it. And a photogram is a one-to-one index. It's a true mathematical record of the object that you place on it. And so I did that, and the largest paper you can get from Ilford, that's black and white, silver gelatin, fiber-based paper, is 20 by 24 inches as a single sheet. And the greenhouse panels are 20 by 24 inches. So they're
it was made for this.
It was like photography gods were.
This is that ordained moment.
Yeah,
that's that ordained moment. That's
yeah. So
that's funny.
I could make the one, and so for me, like, I have spent years going to the greenhouses, but you've never visited as an audience to this work. And so for me, it was about transposing a section of the architecture of the greenhouse into the gallery. So you can move your body along it like I can in the actual site. Because I believe also our bodies are registers. Our bodies are registers of space and of time. And so I want you to experience an element of that in the work.
That also points back to one of the things that you're saying was a limitation of a photograph. Like you could feel yourself almost like inside of it. And having that memory of space, and you're trying to recreate that. That is a really clever and a wonderful expression of that. That is a great idea, and it's a wonderful, like, you have another shot down here too, kind of how it's, wow, and now you can see it in size relation. Wow.
And like Teju Cole speaks about the nature of touch itself. So like, to touch is to be touched. So I can see you without being seen, or I can even smell you without you smelling me, but to touch is to be touched. So if I touch this table or my laptop, the laptop also touches me. And if you think about photography, especially, most of the time we're like told not to touch, like once a print is made, it is like perfect and you have to wear gloves. Or if print is framed, it's made like and protected. But this work is literally represents touch of the bramble, but also it's made through touch, and it's about reconnecting with the image through touch. So I think it's got layers. And it is actually made like this is you're looking at a render, but all of the prints are made and photographed and are in a portfolio box under my bed. And then I photographed the prints and then I collaborated with someone to make these rendered environments, so you could actually experience the works the way I would intend to show it.
Yeah. And a photogram, one-to-one, is touch as well. It's created by the touch.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's I love that. It's really, really interesting how this is the first time we actually get a feel for the greenhouse. And everything else is so close up, and then you have this moment. And I love how you think in space. I just really, really appreciate that. It's really, really interesting. I love the next installation that you did as well, which you're about to show, I think. Talk to me a little bit about that. Is it the same process?
Yeah, so this is called Shelter. It's the exact same process. I can't remember how many individual images it is, but they are all individuals. This time I took the whole side profile or the front profile of a greenhouse. All the remaining panels, all the other panels had been broken in storms, or they'd been pushed out or shattered. And so these were the only remaining panels, and I painstakingly removed them all and then transported them again to the darkroom and then hand printed them all. And so in some of the renders, you can actually move around the piece and you can see the different textures, and again, the sort of brush strokes from the brambles on the panels. And as you move around the piece, you can see all the different textures, different levels of growth. And you can see, if you look closely on that one, you can see like different cracks and breaks in the panel. And for me, it's a piece called Shelter to think about the nature of the home, the nature of architecture to shelter us. But also it's thinking about photography or the image as a shelter. You know, we often retreat into images, our idea of things, we regress into an image of something. It might be an image of ourselves or an image of our past, but that is a shelter. But in this work, the shelter is kind of eroding. You get a sense that maybe someone was actually still installing the piece, like there needs to be more squares added in to make a complete artwork. But it's kind of in between. It feels like it's being built or being deinstalled at the same time.
It also speaks to kind of this decomposing nature by which you found this in. And I think that's really, really interesting too. And you can't help but with this shape, you can't help but think of, that's the first thing you think of. We are symbols and pattern identifying creatures. And so I look at that, and the first thing I think of is a shelter. I think of also safety. And I think it's really interesting that you made that connection to an image being a shelter. And the first thing I thought of was all of these people that are now kind of stuck in their phones, you know, and they're escaping into this image-based world, almost as if it is a safe shelter. You know, I don't know how many people are sitting in their phones, ignoring everyone, trying to find their safe space, you know? And I see people doing that, and I've never thought of it like that. And that's a really interesting idea that I think I'm going to have to think about for a while. Well, you've delivered quite a few of those to me. Yeah. Well, and what's amazing about what it is that you're doing is I often see in photography a very kind of almost reportage kind of thing that goes on. There is some abstraction and in some ideas, but there's a lot of reflection. But you're also adding a level of philosophy in here that's kind of fascinating itself. Are you interested in that aspect of art, to kind of deliver a kind of a philosophy and a thinking? Are you interested in that, or is it just kind of a manifestation of your own kind of being? You think this way, you write this way, you journal this way. Talk to me a little bit about that, because I'm noticing a commonality in that as well.
Thank you. No, yeah, I definitely intend the work to do those sort of things. I'm interested in thought pieces, so works that make us think.
Interesting.
But also I'm interested in works that make us feel. I feel like the works that might be aesthetically attractive is what lead you in, and then there's different layers for depending how far you want to go with the work. I do spend a lot of time researching and reading and thinking about, or trying to think about or build my own theories for my work, and also my own theories about what mediums are like, like how we interact with mediums. So all of my work is a kind of a record of my thinking at a certain time. So yes. So yes, I intend them I intend them to do that. But it's also about creating the perfect scenario where they can be open to that, but also not trying to dictate too much what it should be doing. Like, you need to come and bring your own interpretations to it as well.
It's like coming to it on your own. And that's one area that's and this is one of the reasons I say your work is kind of refreshing to me, is I think that's just one area. I often just want to get into that deep conversation with people, and I find that it's just really not there sometimes, that it's really just what it is, but like with you, I'm seeing you crafting experiences with photography, asking a question and just letting people come to it on their own. And I really appreciate that, because philosophy, in my opinion, is just asking questions and seeking a definition and then challenging that definition and continuing to evolve that definition and thinking a little deeper about something. But what I think is interesting about what you're doing with photography is that you're using landscape, you're questioning your space around you, you're asking those questions, and then creating an experience that it kind of embodies that contemplation. And you're doing it in a way that I think is really quite special. So I have to applaud you there. Well done, sir.
I appreciate it.
Well done. Yeah. I'm kind of a deep thinker, and I try not to go there too much because I don't know how much my audience enjoys that, but that's probably why some people follow, is because I ask these questions. So that's really, really interesting. Is there anything else you wanted to share? There was this one image here. So this one here that I had some questions about.
This one.
Yes. Yeah.
So like more recently, because it's an ongoing body of work, and I'm starting to make like different pieces for the work. So this is an assemblage piece where I'm now actually using or framing the glass with photograms made of the glass as the work itself. So this is a diptych called Part of a Whole. What questions did you have about it?
Well, it was an evolution. I'm seeing kind of a next part to it, and I'm kind of curious, where you said it's an ongoing body of work. Do you have a feeling for where it's going, or are you kind of just leaning into that intuitive nature of the evolution of a project?
If you would like to give me some budget, if some money, to be honest with you, I've got like 30, 40 pieces that I could make if you gave me the budget and the time.
Anybody listening,
I have,
a pile of cash coming your way.
Alex is looking for a sponsor. I have lots of variation. You could actually see some of my ideas that continue this work on a tab on my website called To Be Realized. For me, it's really frustrating that I have all of these works that are unrealized. But as I say, they live in my head, or I write them down, or I sketch them out. And they are all continuations of the greenhouse and of this work. They are getting more progressively sculptural and three-dimensional. But yeah, definitely, I think about them. I'm not someone that just turns up and makes something in one day. I wish I could be like that, a bit more free-flowing.
Yeah. It's interesting. Continue to take us through. And
sorry.
I'm watching an evolution here, and this was another. Go ahead, continue.
So, these are a recent work that I've made last year for a show in Norway, and they're called An Image That Holds Its Heat 1, 2, and 3. They are photo sculptures that take the form of barn cloches, If you're a gardener, you might know what a barn cloche is. It's a 4-panel cloche, so you have 4 panels of glass that loop around to create a barn, and that literally you create a row or a tunnel above whatever vegetables you're growing outside, and it protects them from the cold weather.
Okay.
So essentially they're miniature greenhouses. And so I'm very interested in like photography's relationship to greenhouses and to the idea of incubation. And also this piece references the history of photography. So in the 19th century, during the end of the Civil War, photography was mainly, used on like collodion plate photography, so glass negatives. And at the end of the Civil War, glass was so valuable and so expensive that they actually used negatives of the Civil War, so photographs of horrific sights of like soldiers, of battles, and they used those negatives to create greenhouses. And so what you'd have is a greenhouse of horrors of war, slowly eroding to let more light in to grow like plants or vegetables inside. And so photography has this amazing relationship to growth and to life and to death and to the idea of incubation. And so these works reference that moment of photography's history. I should also add that this gallery is called Nua, and it's in a town called Buda, which is in northern Norway. And it was a big show questioning the past and the future of the city in terms of architecture and development. And in my research, I found that Buda is actually named after the Budagard farm. So the entire city used to be a farm. But what's happening now is that an entire new city is going to be built, and essentially they're concreting over quite a lot of the landscape. And so there's a lot of debates on a local level about whether they should be covering over such a valuable resource, which is their soil, which is their rich soil. So the work questions, like the future of growing, but also the nature of images more broadly. And sorry, I should lastly add, the images you can see are taken from the local archive from a farming school. And so they're images taken by a photographer that visited a farming school in the 1950s, and they're printed onto the glass.
That is the history and the idea that actually makes. How tall are these? Are these?
They're about 50 centimeters high or 45 centimeters high. Okay.
So they're about here, waist. That's a really interesting, and they're kind of changing over time. So the image isn't fixed.
No, they are fixed, but
are they okay?
Yeah, they are fixed, but I wish they changed. That'd be so good. Well, the light changes as the light changes in the room.
Okay,
they change.
Okay.
But maybe that's a good idea for.
Yeah, I was just trying to. Yeah. You're welcome. No, I'm just kidding. No. What I was gonna say though is, what's the relationship with heat there? You said the heat changes, or like talk to me about. Is it because it's that nature of the greenhouse and I understand that aspect of it, the physics of that, but it seemed like that was an important element to this.
Yeah, definitely. So the piece is called, An Image That Holds Its Heat. And so it's literally an image in the form of a cloche, and a cloche is used to hold heat and moisture. But it's also thinking about the idea of photographs to be containers, like a greenhouse, of ideas, of concepts that may reoccur. So this idea of the photograph as a structure that contains, in the same way that a greenhouse or a glass structure would contain something. So here we literally have an image holding its heat. And if something holds its heat, it means it's important, right? It has something worth saying. Otherwise, it would dissipate. So it's about this holding and this incubation. Yeah,
that is you're perfect for this show. You're answering so many questions and giving so many definitions to a lot of the questions that I had that inspired to this show. So, bravo.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
That the wet plate collodions, using those plates to create the and you can flip to the next image as we do this, but used as panels for a greenhouse. I had never heard that before, and to even think that there are war images, these like that is just a fascinating history that I think I'm going to have to read more about this. Is like, I wanted to know more about that. Where did you find that information? How did you?
It's in a book by Rebecca Solnit on Edward Muybridge. It's called A River of Shadow.
Okay. Oh my gosh. Okay. Yeah.
So it's somewhere in there.
Yeah, it's in there.
I couldn't
go
the
get
page
it.
number.
Yeah. Yeah. I would be impressed, actually. You're like 49, page 49.
Yeah. No. It also comes from other conversations I've had. I was having a conversation with Susan Bright, who's a writer and curator, and I was talking to her about the greenhouse work, and she also was speaking about Charles. What's his last name? Charles Jones, who is a gardener, I think in the Victorian times, or maybe the early 20th century, who used to work in a veg garden, and he was a photographer, and he used to photograph all the vegetables he grew, and sometimes he actually made his negatives into cloches as well. And so his work was lost to time until it was discovered in a flea market, I think in like East London, and then the world of photography actually had for the first time his like negatives and his prints of the work he made. So you can find those. So there's this history of
it's a really interesting history. Yeah. It's that kind of stuff that makes me a very excited student of the craft and where this all comes from. You just hear stuff like that and you're just like, wow. Yeah. So do you feel like that's what kind of inspired this next kind of sculpture? You were thinking about that, and you were. That's fascinating.
This one here.
Talk to me about this.
Yeah, so this is one I made actually this year. So I made it in February, and so it's an image that holds its heat, number 4. And instead of a barn cloche, it takes the form of a Victorian design of a cloche. And so you have the 4 sides, and I don't know how many separate panels of glass, quite a lot of panels. There's 8 sides on each. And yeah, so it's again continuing the work into a different form. But this is using images from Jersey. And it's images from 1953 of tomatoes that were growing, and they were actually frozen by the frost. And so this crop of tomatoes were lost. And so for me, I think that it's particularly pertinent to this idea of an image that holds its heat, and to use an image of a crop that was actually lost to frost. So it's a kind of paradoxical work.
Ironic. Yeah.
It's ironic.
Yeah.
But in Jersey, like, we've got lots of questions about, farming and farming's future, especially in terms of the climate emergency. And so for me, it's a question in the future of agriculture.
I'm excited to see where this keeps going. You said it kind of keeps evolving, and I'm excited to kind of continue to follow you and see where this goes. And once that big pile of cash shows up after the show is released, I want a ticket to the opening. So anyway, no, it's really exciting, and I love how you think about an image beyond the frame that we think about it. and you think about the history of photography and the way an image can be represented and what its interpretation can be. And it's all encompassed in this body of work, and it's kind of the next evolution. And I think this actually, the things that you were saying about reflecting on where you're from, Jersey, and thinking about farming, it actually is a great segue into where we're going next. That next body of work that you called an endurance piece. And which we can kind of flip over to that next if you would like.
Sure. Let me see if I can do that. The next body of work I wanted to share is On Living Stones and Reaching, which is a major body of work I made in 2020. Again, this was back in Jersey on my family farm, and my family had been farming Jersey raw potatoes for generations. And for this work, I decided to take it upon myself to actually plant an entire field, over an acre of field in Jersey raw potatoes, myself and by hand. It was a massive undertaking, and it kind of embodies what I'd call an endurance to performance for 3 months. Why I wanted to make the work is because it was the culmination of my research into about 5 years of research for land art, photography, time, and writing. And it kind of all boiled up to create this work. It has many different forms. So the first is Super 8 films that you can see playing now. This is how to plant an image. And then there's also stills where I perform to the camera, and there's also cyanotypes and a significant amount of text. And there's lots of different media in the work, and you're meant to view it chronologically. So the work starts with how to plant an image, where you can see me filming all of the processes that happen to prepare the field for planting. My dad's actually driving some of the tractors that you can see. And he sort of prepares the field very much like the idea of preparing a canvas. In my research, I've come across Dennis Oppenheim, who's a land artist, who actually speaks about preparing the field as if like creating pigments for canvas, or like with the way you would stretch a canvas over a frame, the way you'd mix up your pigments. Thinking about the land and the field as a canvas was very much in my thinking. And so I documented all the different processes that occur, and then myself actually planting the field. You don't actually see images of me planting, but you see the during and the after. So if I move on next, here you have a still image of myself. This is a self-portrait. The work is called Portrait of the Artist Repeating Himself. And so this is in the middle of my planting. It took me 5 days to plant. I started on the far right-hand side of the field, and I moved to the left. I went up and down the furrows, which you can see there in the middle. They're furrows of earth that you then place 3 potatoes on, and then take a step and then place another 3. I would go down the field and then come back. So I do 2 furrows, and at the end of every 2 furrows, I would then take a self-portrait and then move the camera up. There's 26 self-portraits in this series, and when you view all of the images at a distance, you can see the time of day changing. And so you can see I start in the morning, I end in the late afternoon. And so this is like representing this idea of labor, of working the land, moving across the land, and the lengths we take to plant things. I should say that this work was about the idea of planting an image. So this whole project is the idea of the field fully grown as the image I was wanting to reach. And so, in the world we live in, making photographs or images is so quick and instantaneous. This was about lengthening out the image making process as much as possible, and to like labor over this idea of one image, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
100%. You're exactly, that's really interesting. And I like how you put it in parallel with a process that some may be familiar with or not familiar with. So I think it's interesting. And I love your titles, by the way.
Thank you.
How to Plant an Image. That's a wonderful. Portraits of the Artist Repeating Himself. I think that's, you have a sense of humor about yourself. I think it's great.
This one in particular, Portrait of the Artist Repeating Himself, that's a reference to Portraits of the Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce. And it's also in response to something I once heard someone speak about how they never repeat themselves. And I was thinking that how as an artist, I constantly repeat myself. Like I constantly repeat and turn over the same idea or trying to get at something that's so hard to grasp. And so for me, the creation process is like repetition until I try to reach the thing. So
it's interesting.
Embodied by me laboring up and down the field.
Don't you think that's kind of impossible not to repeat yourself?
I think it is, because I think
impossible. Yeah. Interesting. I was like, are you sure?
Yeah.
You don't even know. Maybe it's maybe conscious repetitiveness is what they don't do. It's interesting because there's a subconscious nature to our actions. But anyway, continue. That's kind of a sidebar. So, yeah.
So we have other works, and so I planted the field. It nearly killed me. I felt like I played rugby for England. I literally I couldn't get into a bath. I couldn't get out of bed. It was like horrendous. I've never pushed my body physically to that extreme. So anyway, you have other stills. So this is me climbing over the potato boxes the empty potato boxes. I worked out I planted over 30,000 potatoes by hand, and this is the boxes they came in. And then there's some further works. This is teaching the camera how to carry. A self-portrait of me showing the camera how the camera could carry the potato box. But it was also questioning the idea of how images carry meaning or contain meaning. And so like this metaphysical carrying of meaning, and then me physicalizing an actual carrying.
It's got Hito-style vibes, you know.
Oh, okay. That's a very I like that reference.
Yeah.
And then during the growth of the field, I started writing, and I wrote through so many different styles and techniques of writing. Some of the text is very lyrical or poetic or fragmentary or experimental, and then in other areas it's very autobiographical and like a historian's writing on the nature of a subject. And the writing goes through all of these like highs and lows, questioning the nature of images through different metaphors and analogies, until we got to the last day before harvesting. But before I harvested, I actually made these large cyanotype floor works called, the full title is, I can't even remember the full title. The short title is 5 Furrows. And it's a section, the bottom right-hand section of the field of 5 furrows that are grown, and they're 4 meter long cyanotypes. And they were made with my dad, my stepmom, my cousin, and my auntie, helping me pull back the plants and unroll the paper, and then I would wash them in the garden.
Wow. It's you're kind of trying to recreate the rose, which I love.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So, that's a really interesting way to use cyanotype.
Do you remember what the gesture of brambles, where we were taking a section of the greenhouse into the gallery? This is the same idea. So it's about, you can't visit the field, but with this work, you could walk along the rows, up and down the furrows, around the piece, and you get a sense of just a small scale of one section of the field. Because again, it's a photogram, so it's a true representation of the size.
That's awesome. That's interesting.
And it also goes back again to the history of photography with like Anna Atkins and her cyanotypes and the blueprints. and how photography was really born in the garden, because early experiments of photography, you needed to be near the house, you needed to be near running water, because the amount of chemicals you had to use to try and like make depictions. So a lot of like the earliest photography is of plants, of gardens. And so like a field is essentially an advanced garden, right? It's agriculture. It's not for aesthetic beauty like a garden is. It's for practical use.
Completely. And it has an indexical quality to it back then too. And here, this is kind of it's kind of doing it in a similar way, but it's more. Once again, you're breaking the rules, which I really enjoy. It's interesting. It's a really interesting manifestation to the ideas that you're trying to portray. So, I think it's. How long are these? Are these big? Are they
4 meters? Yeah.
How long is that?
4 meters
okay.
each.
So it's
400 centimeters.
You're
each.
It's like 4 people laying down. You know? Like that's interesting. Yeah. Well, and the other interesting thing about that is it's very immersive. I think on the image you can't really get a feel for that, but this almost is like taking you there. But it's interesting. Do you find that it kind of captures the essence to it, or essence, or what? Because it's not like you're walking in a field per se. It's almost there's a separation there. It's like a representation of it. Do you like that element to it, or do you know what I'm saying here?
I think you're trying.
It's not the field, but it is a representation of it. And when you're amongst it, you get the scale of it, but it's not the thing. You know, it's like an interesting interpretation of it. Is that kind of? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So it's not the field, but it's an image of the field. And I guess the whole work was about the nature of images. So it's kind of like, for me, I see it as a sketch of the field. So like,
I like
it's like that's actually the original title. The full title is 5 sketches running for 210 seconds or 5 furrows. And so the exposure is 210 seconds. And I thought of them as like early sketches of the field whilst it was growing.
Yeah.
And it kind of relates to the history of landscape painting, where like painters would go on plein air and then like make a sketch of, say, a landscape with a tree in it. And then they might do an early draft, but then they'd go back to their studio to then create the full painting or the finalized image. And so for me, I see them as like, they're like the working image before I reach the final fully grown field.
Love it.
Yeah.
That's really clever. It's really interesting how you use the medium of photography and like these interesting ways. I like it a lot.
Thank you. It's nice to talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah. This next one kind of gave me Richard Avedon vibes again, but of plants.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
If you were to zoom out on some of that, yeah.
Yeah, I had never thought about that, but yeah, in the American West.
Yeah.
This is an image of my sister ceremoniously harvesting the first potatoes of the first plant from the field. So we did this shot, and I wanted to focus on the first image, or the first pixel or pigment of the image being pulled out, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then we harvested it with actual harvesters, and there's another film called How to Harvest an Image. And recently I actually had an exhibition. I've got an exhibition on at the moment in Jersey, where I have both how to plant an image and how to harvest an image running simultaneously on the same screen. And so you can see the processes of planting and harvesting at the same time. And it's like soliloquial. This idea of like a constant process or cycle.
Circular. Yeah. Do you find, by doing this by hand, so much of this is automated now? I can't help but look at this and see the machinery that it takes to be a farmer these days.
Mm-hmm.
And do you find yourself reflecting on that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's like economy of scale of like farmers have to farm a certain amount to have any income to continue. And it's like very tricky in terms of like the demand of like consumers, like how much needs to be grown for people. But also how expensive it is to grow food, and how tricky it is, especially with like the changing climate. But when I look at machinery, I'm really fascinated in the machinery and the processes of these machines. But I like to draw analogies between them and technology within mediums, so like photographic technology or film technology.
Yeah.
There's something about that. I actually want to make a film on the grading machine, which is where we size the potatoes into different sizes, and I want to make a film.
Yeah.
I want to make a film called Grader, which is just about grading. So you have this analogy between color grading of films and then grading of like an actual organic produce.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting, and I get to thinking about, I honestly, like, I'm fascinated by the machinery and how it like mimics processes, and when you do something by hand, you kind of learn a lot about the process. And what's interesting about when you watch these machines, you watch how that becomes mechanized, and it makes me think of the photography process of the darkroom and how it got translated into Photoshop, and everything is related to the darkroom process, even to the digital aspect of it, the exposure times and all of it. It all mimics the exact original process. And so there's this fascinating translating of tasks to more automation and all of it that is happening right now. And our world is kind of slowly shifting, but it's still referencing the past. And when I look at this, I kind of feel that. When I look at this one particular, and you're kind of trying to connect to that original process in some ways. And so that's why I wanted to ask you, like, were you trying to connect to your roots in some ways of like the family history or of your place and your time? Were you doing a little bit of that, trying to kind of get to that origin? I'm kind of a little curious about that.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I use this as an opportunity to learn quite deeply about the history of Jersey, but also the history of my family, our agricultural roots. Totally. If you had a chance to read any of the writing on my website, I go into quite a lot of detail about my great grandfather. And a story of, he had quite a sad story on the farm. And so, yeah, it was very personal. And also like my grandparents, my gran and her sister, they were like really well known on the island as like two of the best planters of potatoes. And so her and her sister used to like absolutely demolish a field in one day, and they could plant the whole thing themselves, which is you have to be crazy fit to do that. And for me as like a creative person, I've always felt a bit inadequate, like, I'm a creative or arty type, I can't physically do the work, and so I kind of like setting myself these quite intense physical challenges that relate to my past, and to see if I can do it, and I was mimicking the motion of my gran that she did on the field, like religiously. It feels nice to reconnect with the body, and it's kind of what you were touching on, this form of like embodied knowledge of doing the thing, like in the dark room, the analog, that you lose something when it goes digital, and you gain something if you can return to the physical method and process. It's like an ancestral knowledge.
Yeah, and that's the feeling I got when I was actually reading, and I couldn't help but kind of relate it to processes that I know very well. I got better at the digital stuff once I understood where it came from, and then I was like, and then I got better at Photoshop. But I'm just using that as an analogy of something that I'm familiar with. But you can look at this in an interesting lens and through all of this, and I'm kind of curious. Was it fun to collaborate with the family on this?
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Yeah, yeah. I was kind of curious, but like I'm sure the family was like laying out the cyanotype with you. I thought about you kind of reaching out to them and say, "Hey, I got this idea. Help me with it."
Yeah, I haven't got any assistants or assistants.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh well, your family is they're around. I loved working with them. I'd like to do more actually.
Yeah,
and it's like
I think
together. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, and you said like earlier in the conversation, you're like, oh, my dad finally last year said, I get it, keep going, kind of moment, but now you're kind of bringing it home and you're expressing yourself in all these different ways. And I bet that was interesting. And I was just curious about that, when you have such a personal project that embodies and brings it kind of goes back to your personal roots. And I really appreciate you diving into your family's history like that and writing so much about it. It's really interesting to kind of dive into that world. And so how do you like, is this work still going, or you said you had an idea for another with the grading? Do you feel like you're going to continue doing?
Yeah, I think of the farm as a medium. So everything that happens on the farm, all the processes is a kind of medium. It's a process. So I have so many works I would like to make, and I'm hoping to get cracking with some new ones. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Because I'm sure you have to travel there in order to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you have that. Well, how do you, you've installed this as well, correct?
Installed it. Yeah.
No?
I've shown.
Yeah, you have some installation. Yeah. You showed that the cyanotype, and then you were talking about the two films running that created this kind of circular, which I loved.
Yeah. I don't have any images of them. Sorry.
It's okay.
I've got an image of, it was recently shown in a show in Ireland last year at Lismore Castle Arts, which was a wonderful show created by Susan Bright. And Susan showed 3 of the furrows in the center of the chapel. Should I get that picture up?
It's if you want. I think the way you think about your images and the way you think about these in space, I think there's a really interesting connection there, because you're seeing this not just the work itself, but you're seeing it in space. There's such a large connection there, and we're going to get a chance to kind of get a look at now you thinking into books, which I'm really excited about because I love the photo book, and so I'm excited about what you're about to do with that. But yeah, let's take a look.
So I was actually in a show last year at Lismore Castle Arts, curated by Susan Bright, called To Walk in the Image. It was a beautiful show with 3 artists, myself, Sabine Marilesi, and Phoebe Cummings. And in the show, I got to show 3 of the furrows in the center of the space in this beautiful old chapel. And it was like the 3 furrows were perfectly in line with the glass windows of the chapel. And for me, there was this like kind of reference to Aomori at the very beginning, where like
100%
the work was work was made of blue glass from a chapel for a church.
Yeah.
And then it just felt like it was such a wonderful show to be a part of, and I had those other kind of like personal references going. and this is
well, that's a it's almost like I'm meant to be here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. That kind of gave me chills. Hold on. That's pretty cool. Yeah. Yeah.
And so for the show, I got to show 3 of them, and then they're presented in this steel welded trays that were made on the farm and then shipped to Ireland. And then we also had some little shelves put in, and then perspex to cover the prints, so they're protected. But because they were framed by the perspex, they had this amazing like physicality. It really heightened the work. And you got these subtle reflections from the perspex, and it felt like you could almost dive into them. So I was really excited to see them installed in the gallery and to get people to experience them.
Wow. That's awesome. I love seeing how this stuff. I love the scale shot with the person there. You get a really great feel for how big these are, and so I love how you think about your images in space. It's really inspiring, actually.
Thank you. And
how cool is that?
Touching on it earlier, and I've always thought of exhibitions first. Like, my work is conceived for exhibition. It's never conceived as a book. Well, it has been up until this point, because I care about the way we interact and move around the photographic. And also I think maybe it's because I keep trying to make work which isn't just framed on a wall. Well, I'm trying to anyway. Yeah, and like in terms of like install shots as well. So if I make a new artwork, I know the angle and perspective of the install shot before the work's even made. Like I know, I can think that far in advance as to how the optimum engagement I think of the work. So yeah, it's interesting.
I think that's awesome. Well, it's interesting to have that kind of foresight. It's interesting that you are thinking beyond it, and it's like I said before, it's just really inspiring. And it's almost like there's a lot of my favorite quotes they talk about. They said start with the end in mind, and so much of that can drive what you create, and it can also like help you think a little bit broader and be more creative. So it's a very interesting process that I don't see often, because I hear some people, and especially in the photographic medium, they're kind of shooting and they don't know why they're shooting it. Then they're not starting with the end in mind. And then all of a sudden the project happens because they start to see some comparisons there, or the research is the beginning, and then they go and shoot, and then you know what I mean? But you have this whole thing kind of mapping out as you go, and it's just a really interesting. And I think that way sometimes, especially when I was in school, and I thought I was crazy for it. It's so cool to meet you. So thank you. You're inspiring me. So it's really, really cool. So thank you. So now you're thinking in a book, and you're going to tease a book. You're not going to show us everything because you want people to get the book. But can you show us that and kind of give us a tease on that?
Absolutely. Let me just find it. Yeah, I'm going to tease a book. So although I've just said all that stuff about never working in a book, the most recent body of work I've made felt perfect for a book. And so I'm working with Folium Publishing, which is a great publishing house in London, run by Harry and Stuart. They make really beautiful books. They're very process-based books. They take risks, and they have a lot of the same references that I do to like conceptual art and to like publishing of that era. And so it felt like a good collaboration. And so we've got a new book coming out at the end of this year called The Night and the First Sculpture, which is my first book. And it's a book that contains a whole series of new sculptures and performances made in the farm warehouse at night. And I've got an image to show you here. This is called Snakes and Ladders. But the whole series is me essentially using what materials I have on the farm and combining them, and then bringing in loads of these personal narratives and reference points to help sort of represent them. So Snakes and Ladders is based off of the childhood game Snakes and Ladders, where we're forced to move place. So in this work, exactly. It's actually intended that the artist could go to the bottom palette, and then you could choose to decide to like climb directly up the ladder or to go off the right-hand side ladder and essentially move around the palettes. And so there's actually 4 palettes that you could land on, which represents north, east, south, west. And I'm very interested in how, as bodies, we move through space and place, and how we relate to place, how we become anchored to places, and how sometimes things are beyond our control can force us to move. So it's just a little teaser of the sort of work that's coming up.
And you have a performative element in there too. So you have some series of images that are very performative by yourself.
Yep. I've also got, this is one called A Place Possesses Me, where they're often sequential performances where I'm doing a task. This is a task where I'm stacking a tower of palettes. And so essentially it starts with the artist stacking one palette, and then there's a series of 46 images, and eventually the tower is so large it leaves the frame of the image, and then the artist is seen climbing up the tower and disappearing out of the image. In this work, I don't know whether to try and explain it. I think maybe I'll leave it there and that's enough.
You should, and I think we can leave it there, and then and you're hoping to have the book out by the end of this year, 2024. You're hoping.
I'm hoping.
Or do you think it is, or
it is?
Okay.
I don't know what month it is, but I think maybe autumn.
Okay.
Autumn. So maybe September. Keep an eye. I don't know. Follow me on Instagram. Sign up for a discount.
Yeah, I think that's great. Good plug. Well done. Good job. That is great.
It's coming out.
That's awesome. It's I see so much of your previous work in here. I love that you're still at the farm, and you're now taking that sculpture element that you see in all your. We only got to look at just a few of the series that you do, but you have so much more work on your website, and you can get a feel for kind of the way you think about space. But I love how you're kind of making these sculptures and then photographing them. So you've got this full circle thing going on, and I love the inventiveness. I just have one more question for you, and then we can kind of finish up, and we can stop right there. My final question that I ask everybody is we have a lot of people that are artists and photographers that watch this show, and they're kind of curious. A lot of times they kind of need that little bit of inspiration or whatever. So do you have any advice for anybody out there that wants to be a maker? I have a few takeaways from listening to you today, but I'm curious what your advice would be to anybody out there that wants to be a maker. I call you a pure maker, someone that's not just a photographer. You're making things. So what advice would you give people that want to kind of make their way this way?
Think you've got to try and nurture your curiosity. That's like the core element, right? You have to start to have an interest about how things work or how things come together or what brings things apart. Think that's the basis for me. So curiosity.
And and this is going to be mine because I'm going to add something in here. Don't be afraid to break the rules and to write your own rules, and then follow those rules to make a body of work. And what are rules anyway? So I loved it. I had a great time today. Thank you so much for sharing your work with with us and being a part of this project. I really had a great time, so thank you.
Well, thanks very much. It's been great talking with you. It's nice to chat through the work. Don't often get a chance to go in that depth. So, yeah, I really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me on.
And so, just how can people connect with you? Do you have an Instagram? This is that place where you can tell people how to find your work and how to connect with you.
Yeah, I've got an Instagram. It's quite active on my Instagram. I share a lot of my research and my practice on Instagram. Alexander Mourant, at Alexander Mourant. And then my website is my name as well. And so you can have a look on there, and I normally update it. I'm normally pretty good at updating that sort of stuff. So yeah. And you can hopefully share the...
But check out the website. Yeah, everyone should check out the website. It's going to be in the description. So check out his website. He's got so much more work on there. You are quite busy, and I love that. And you also have a curatorial practice. You're teaching. You're super involved, and so I love seeing what you're involved in. So once again, thank you again, and thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you, mate.
To all those that have made it this far, thank you so much for joining us today on the Urbanaut Podcast. If you like content like this, please help us with the algorithm by liking, sharing, and commenting. I say this every time, but it really does help us. So if you want to support us, help us that way. Also, if you want to help us in a different way, a little deeper, consider being a subscriber with us on patreon.com. Go there, help us there, and become a member there. And as always, we'll see you next time.